The recorder wasn't something Veronica had planned to buy. It was one of those random choices that feel meaningless in the moment until they change everything. She picked it up on a gray Tuesday afternoon, wandering through the quiet streets of downtown. The store wasn't her usual stop, a narrow electronics shop wedged between a bakery and a laundromat. It looked plain, almost invisible, and yet, for reasons she couldn't quite explain, Veronica felt drawn to it. Inside, a young clerk greeted her with the kind of genuine enthusiasm you rarely see anymore. He spoke about the recorder as if it were some hidden gem, simple, reliable, perfect for lectures, or for talking through your thoughts when you couldn't sleep. She smiled politely, saying she didn't attend lectures, but the part about sleepless nights that hit a little too close. Veronica hadn't been sleeping properly for months. It had started as the occasional restless night, the kind you blame on too much coffee or a late dinner. But as the weeks dragged on, sleep drifted further away, leaving her trapped in an endless twilight between exhaustion and awareness. Her nights had become long, hollow stretches of silence. She'd lie awake in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the radiator and the distant tires against wet asphalt. There was something about that stillness, something that made her feel like she wasn't alone, even when she was. Her apartment wasn't uncomfortable, at least not by day. It had warm light, 2 tidy bedrooms, and rent that didn't crush her. But after sunset, it changed. The air grew heavy. The refrigerator buzzed like a swarm of insects. Floorboards creaked slowly, then suddenly, as if someone was walking just outside her door. Sometimes, through the paper-thin walls, she could hear faint murmurs, not full words, not even clear sounds, but the unmistakable rhythm of voices. It was enough to make her sit up in bed, heart pounding, staring into the dark. Her doctor had been kind, if a bit distant, suggesting the usual: sleeping pills, warm milk, writing before bed. You might try speaking your thoughts out loud, he'd said. Sometimes it helps to release what's trapped in your head. That advice had stayed with her, maybe because it sounded so much like what the clerk had said that afternoon. So she placed the little black recorder beside her bed. Every night before trying to sleep, she pressed the red button and began to talk. At first, it was harmless, small details of her day, the kind of chatter you might share with no one in particular. But as the nights went on, her voice grew softer, more uncertain. The things she began to describe weren't always there when the lights were on. And when she played the recordings back, she started to hear something she hadn't said. Each night before bed, Veronica had begun a small ritual. She'd press record and quietly speak into the darkness, recounting her day, her worries, and what she hoped tomorrow might bring. It felt harmless at first, maybe even healing, like whispering secrets to someone who would never judge or interrupt. For the first 3 weeks, the habit became her comfort. Every evening, she'd set the little recorder on her nightstand, lie back against the pillow, and let her thoughts spill out in soft confessions. She'd talk about her work at the library, the endless shuffle of paperwork, the music from her neighbors that grew louder with each passing weekend. And sometimes, when her voice faltered, she'd mention her mother aging, unwell, far away in the countryside. In the mornings, she'd make tea and listen back. Hearing her own voice surprised her. It sounded steadier somehow, not timid or tired, but composed. It was as if she was listening to a version of herself she'd always wanted to be. There was something soothing about that. The ritual gave her a fragile sense of order, a small, private world that belonged only to her. She began to look forward to those nighttime sessions. They made the silence feel less empty. It was company of a sort, even if that company was her own echo. But everything changed one cold morning in mid-October. Veronica awoke later than usual, the light already slipping through the curtains, pale and muffled like fog. Her head felt heavy. On the pillow beside her, the recorder's tiny red light still glowed, meaning it had been running all night. That wasn't strange. She often forgot to switch it off. Yawning, she brewed her morning tea and settled by the window to listen, expecting the usual sleepy chatter, her thoughts about the library's budget, her uncertainty about visiting her mother. Just her voice, filling the quiet room. But as the audio played, her expression froze. Her voice was there, yes, calm, familiar. "I don't know why I can't sleep properly anymore," she heard herself say. "Every time I close my eyes, my mind just keeps circling." Then a faint sound interrupted her, soft, but unmistakable. Another voice. Low, close, whispering just beneath her own. "Around." Then another voice. Soft, measured, almost musical, with the faintest trace of an accent she couldn't quite place. "Maybe," it said, calm as a sigh, "you're not meant to sleep like everyone else. Maybe your rest belongs to a different rhythm." Veronica froze, every muscle in her body locked. Her thumb hovered above the stop button, but she couldn't press it. The sound of that voice, so close, so intimate, had rooted her to the chair. Then she heard herself answer. "What do you mean by that? Other rhythms?" Her own voice, responding naturally, conversationally, as if she were talking to someone sitting right beside her. "I mean," the second voice continued, patient and deliberate, "the world insists that night is for sleeping. But what if some people aren't built for that? What if their minds wake when others dream?" Veronica's heartbeat thundered in her ears. She stared at the recorder, unable to look away, as her own recorded voice began to respond, curious, engaged, discussing ideas she didn't remember ever having. For the next 40 minutes, the recording unfolded like a dialogue between strangers, using her voice as one of them. They spoke of consciousness and the thin boundary between waking and dreaming, of how time might bend differently when no one's watching, of the possibility that reality itself wasn't fixed, but shifting, fluid. Her recorded self sounded alive in a way she hadn't felt in years, sharp, fascinated, almost enchanted. But Veronica had no memory of speaking any of it. None. Her mind scrambled for logic. There had to be an explanation. Sleep talking, perhaps, or some kind of feedback in the microphone. Maybe the second voice was interference from a nearby apartment. The building was old, its walls thin. She spent hours testing every possibility. She spoke into the recorder in whispers, in normal tones, in laughter and shouts, trying to recreate that voice. Nothing matched its smooth cadence, its gentle precision. She pressed her ear to the wall, listening to the elderly Mrs. Chen boiling water next door, to the man upstairs who always seemed to be on the phone. None of them sounded remotely similar. Frustrated, she turned to her laptop, searching forums, manuals, anything that could explain how a cheap digital recorder might accidentally capture a ghost of another voice. But there was nothing, no glitch, no malfunction. And yet when she played the recording again, the second voice was still there, calm, patient, waiting. By noon, Veronica had gone through every logical theory she could think of. Audio distortion, frequency overlap, a recording glitch. But the more she searched, the less sense it made. The recorder was a simple, reputable model, nothing fancy, nothing prone to malfunctions. There were no known faults that could twist her voice into something else. No mention online of phantom echoes or overlapping speech. By the afternoon, reason had run dry. The voice, calm, melodic, undeniably real, remained, and it was there every time she pressed play. That night, Veronica approached her bedtime ritual differently, with a deliberate precision that bordered on fear. She replaced the batteries, cleaned the small silver grill of the microphone, and double-checked every corner of the room for potential noise sources. The vent, the hallway, even the old radiator. She placed the recorder exactly where it always sat, right beside the lamp. But as she lay down, she couldn't stop listening to the faint hum of the city, to the soft ticking of her clock, to her own shallow breathing. She told herself she'd stay awake, that this time she'd catch whatever caused the voice. But sleep has its own quiet tricks. Sometime in the night, she drifted off. The last thing she remembered was the gentle patter of rain tapping against the glass, and a strange, heavy stillness in the room, as though someone else was there, sitting patiently beside her bed, waiting for her to dream. When morning came, the world looked ordinary again. Pale light through the curtains, the same chill air, the same small recorder lying still on her nightstand, its red light blinking steadily. She brewed her tea, sat down and pressed play. At first came her own voice, calm and familiar. But soon, the second voice returned, the one she'd begun to think of as the companion. This time, it spoke with greater ease. It knew things it shouldn't have known, details about her work at the library, her aging mother, even childhood moments in the Cotswolds she hadn't mentioned in years. But it spoke of them as if it had seen them itself from somewhere just beyond her reach. "You've always been too careful," it said gently. "Too afraid of how others might see you. What if their opinions don't matter as much as you think?" Veronica's recorded self hesitated, then replied, her tone thoughtful. "I suppose I've always tried to be cautious. Life teaches you that, doesn't it?" "Does it?" the voice murmured. "Or do we tell ourselves that story to make fear feel noble?" The exchange continued for nearly an hour. What she heard wasn't hostile. It was intimate, probing, compassionate in a way that felt almost loving. The voice didn't scold her, it understood her. And what unsettled her most was how eagerly her own recorded voice responded. She sounded alive, engaged, like a woman awakening from a long, invisible sleep. Each morning, Veronica would wake up, make her tea, and press play. Listening to the conversations from the night before had become her new ritual, though lately, she wasn't sure who she was listening to anymore. The woman on those recordings sounded like her, but not quite. There was a steadiness to her tone, a quiet authority that Veronica didn't remember possessing. At first, the changes were barely noticeable, tiny ripples in her daily routine that could have been brushed off as coincidence. But they grew, slowly, quietly, until she could no longer pretend she was the same person she'd always been. It began one morning at the library. Mrs. Peyton, her superior, sharp-tongued and perpetually unimpressed, had launched into another critique of Veronica's new cataloging system. Normally, Veronica would have apologized, nodding meekly until the storm passed, but that day she didn't. "I believe my method is more efficient," she said evenly, her voice calm but firm. "It reduces processing time and improves reference accuracy." The words surprised even her, like they'd come from somewhere else. Yet when she looked up, Mrs. Peyton had fallen silent, startled by this new composure. In 23 years, Veronica had never defended herself. Now she did without hesitation. And it didn't stop there. During the next staff meeting, she raised her voice again, this time to point out the poor heating in the children's section. She spoke with precision, quoting figures and maintenance reports she hadn't even realized she remembered. Everyone turned to listen. Later that week, she politely declined an invitation she'd been too timid to refuse for months, a dull church committee gathering that once felt obligatory. She simply said, "No, thank you," and left it at that. No guilt, no second guessing. Then came the small moment that shook her the most. She stood at the return counter of a department store, holding a navy blue dress she bought weeks earlier. A dress meant for a social event she'd never attended. Normally, she would have tucked it away in the back of her closet, another silent reminder of plans unfulfilled. But this time she returned it, calmly, confidently. As the clerk processed the refund, Veronica caught her own reflection in the store mirror. She looked different, not dramatically but undeniably. Her shoulders straighter, her eyes clearer. There was something behind them, a quiet awareness, as though someone else were standing there too, sharing her skin. And every morning after, as she pressed play on those nightly recordings, the conversations continued. Her voice and the voice beside it growing closer. Two minds breathing through one body. The voice had become something like a presence, one that Veronica no longer feared. It felt familiar now, almost intimate. It spoke with calm certainty, as if it had always known her better than she ever could. "You've spent your life apologizing for existing," it murmured one night, its tone neither harsh nor kind, just true. "But what if you never needed to say sorry? What if you've been fine all along, just living someone else's version of you?" The words sank deep. They weren't just advice, they were revelation. Each morning, when she replayed the recordings, she'd feel a strange warmth in her chest, like finding a letter written by a wiser version of herself. These late-night conversations, the ones she didn't remember having, were somehow becoming the most important part of her days. But soon, the comfort began to crack. It started subtly. She was sure she'd arranged to meet her friend Penelope for lunch on Thursday. She could picture the message she'd sent, even remember planning what to wear. But when Thursday came, there was no reminder on her calendar. And when she called, Penelope's voice was confused. "Lunch? I don't remember making any plans, Veronica. Are you sure?" Veronica was sure, but her certainty felt fragile, like holding onto a dream that faded the moment she tried to describe it. Then came more slips. She recalled a conversation with her downstairs neighbor about a new security system for the building, but when she mentioned it again, he frowned. "What system? Nothing's changed since I moved in." That night she went searching through her apartment, through the familiar shadows that used to bring her comfort. That's when she noticed it, a small watercolor painting that should have been hanging above her dresser gone. In its place, a framed photo she didn't recognize. A garden, lush, beautiful, but she had never seen it before in her life. When she called her mother to ask about the painting, her voice trembled. "Mom, you remember that sea painting you gave me, don't you?" There was a pause on the other end. "Painting? I don't recall ever giving you one, sweetheart. Are you feeling all right?" Veronica didn't answer. The next morning, she played the night's recording, searching for answers. And there, amid the soft hum of her voice, was it. The companion, calm, assured. "Memory," it said, "is more fluid than you think. Maybe the world isn't changing, maybe it's correcting itself. Perhaps you're remembering things the way they were always meant to be." Her recorded self paused, then replied softly, "Maybe you're right. I've been distracted lately. Maybe this is just clarity. But as the tape clicked off, Veronica realized something chilling. She didn't remember ever agreeing. Veronica listened to the recording with growing unease. Her own voice, calm, reflective, at times even amused, responded with a familiarity that frightened her. The way she said "you" and "I," it no longer sounded like two separate people speaking. When she played back a section midway through the tape, her breath caught. "You don't need to fear change, Veronica," the other voice said softly. "You are change." A long pause, then her own recorded whisper, "Then who am I when I'm awake?" No response, only a faint sound like breathing, or maybe a second microphone being adjusted. That night she couldn't bring herself to sleep. She unplugged every electronic device, taped over the recorder's microphone and placed it in a drawer. But at 3:17 a.m., she woke to the sound of her own voice coming from the drawer, muffled but unmistakable. "You shouldn't have done that," it said. The next morning she returned to the sleep lab, pale and trembling. The technician, the same kind young woman, looked up in confusion. "Back already?" I think there's something wrong with your equipment," Veronica stammered. "Could you check the data from last night again?" The technician frowned. "From last night? Ms. Vale, you were only here once 4 days ago." Veronica froze. "That's impossible. I was here yesterday." The technician turned the monitor toward her. "No, see, the room's been empty since your test. The keycard logs confirm it." Veronica leaned closer. On the screen was the feed from her test night, timestamped 4 days earlier, showing her asleep, motionless, electrodes attached. And then just before dawn, something moved. Not Veronica. Something beside her bed, a vague, dark outline that leaned close to her sleeping face, speaking without sound. The technician paused the video, her hand trembling on the mouse. "Do you want me to keep playing this?" she whispered. Veronica couldn't answer. The screen flickered. The paused frame shifted, as if the figure had turned to look directly into the camera, and smiled. "Would you like me to continue the story from this exact moment, building it into a cinematic horror sequence, perfect for your True Horror Stories compilation video style?" Veronica's recorded voice responded with the reverence of a disciple. "Then everything I remember could be rewritten." A low hum answered, not quite a voice this time, something beneath speech. "Not rewritten," it finally said, "rearranged." That word lingered like smoke, rearranged. From that night forward, reality itself began to warp in small, surgical increments. She would wake to find the furniture subtly displaced, her handwriting altered in her own journals, street names changing by a single letter. Once, she caught her reflection in the mirror, smiling a fraction of a second after she did. The next recording was different. There was no dialogue, only a steady, rhythmic breathing hers, and a whisper that rose so softly it was almost indistinguishable from the static. "You don't need to remember anymore. I will do that for you." The voice had grown colder, stripped of the warmth it once carried. Yet there was something soothing in its confidence, as if it were building something, reconstructing her piece by piece while she slept. The technician called again a week later. Her voice was shaking. "Ms. Vale, we reviewed the footage from your last session again. Something's not right." Veronica went back to the hospital that afternoon. The basement lab felt different this time, colder, darker. The technician met her at the console, her face pale under the fluorescent light. "We rechecked the logs," she said. "The system didn't just record your sleep, It recorded activity in the room. What kind of activity? The technician hesitated, then pulled up a still image from the feed. It showed Veronica lying peacefully in bed, and another shape seated beside her, translucent but human, watching. Veronica's mouth went dry. That can't be real. The technician nodded slowly. That's what we thought too, until we enhanced the audio. She pressed play. The faint voice filled the room, distorted but intelligible. She's beginning to see. The technician stopped the playback. Silence fell heavy. Veronica whispered, "It knows we're listening." The monitor flickered. Then, for a single frozen second, both women saw the figure on screen turn its head directly toward the camera and smile. Her voice on the recording had changed. It carried a calm she didn't recognize, a certainty that felt both powerful and alien. "I think I understand now," the recorded Veronica said softly. "All this time I've been clinging to the past like it was proof of who I am. But maybe it's okay to let it all shift. Maybe change isn't destruction, it's evolution." The woman who sat each morning replaying these recordings felt a growing unease crawl beneath her skin. She knew the voice was hers, every cadence, every breath, but the person speaking no longer felt familiar. It was like listening to an echo from a version of herself that had stepped just out of reach. Then came the morning that tore everything apart. Veronica woke to find her apartment wrong. Not entirely, but wrong in the kind of way that makes your stomach drop before your mind catches up. The furniture was familiar but subtly misplaced, as though rearranged by someone trying to reconstruct her life from memory. Her bookshelf stood where it always had, but the titles had changed. The same spines, the same bindings, yet the words on them were different. She froze at the mantel, the photographs. In every frame, her face smiled back, but the moments captured were impossible. A birthday party she never attended, a man she'd never dated kissing her cheek, a seaside vacation she'd never taken, but there she was, sunburnt and laughing among strangers who looked at her like family. Her heart pounding, she grabbed her phone and called her mother. "Mom, I think something happened. The apartment looks different. My things, my photos." Her mother's voice was gentle but oddly distant, like a friendly stranger reading from a script. "It's lovely to hear from you, dear. How are things at the museum?" Veronica's stomach dropped. "The museum? Mom, I work at the library." A pause, then a polite chuckle. "Oh, of course, the library. I don't know why I said that." But her tone didn't sound like confusion. It sounded like uncertainty, like someone struggling to keep a lie straight. That night's recording held the only clue she'd get. The voice, her voice, was speaking with conviction now, almost rapture. "You've spent your life trying to preserve a version of yourself that doesn't exist anymore," the other presence said, smooth and reassuring. "But history is just a choice. Identity is a habit. You can let go of both. You can become something new." The recorded Veronica laughed softly, a sound that chilled her waking self to the bone. "Yes," the voice on the tape said, I'm ready to let it all go." But as Veronica listened in her dim apartment, surrounded by evidence of a life that might never have been hers, she realized that something else was doing the letting go. And it wasn't her. The last recording didn't sound like any of the others. Her voice was still there, but changed. It carried a new kind of certainty, smooth and assured, stripped of all hesitation. Yet something in it felt hollow, like hearing a familiar melody played in a different key. "I think it's done," her recorded self said calmly. "Everything we set out to change, it's complete or almost." "Almost," replied the other voice. It was softer than before, but filled with quiet satisfaction. "Just a few final adjustments. You've been remarkably compliant, Veronica, more adaptable than most." A pause, then her own voice answered almost cheerfully. "I suppose I finally understand. My old life, it was so small, wasn't it? So limited. I spent so much time protecting things that didn't matter." "Exactly," the companion said. "Now you're free to live as you were meant to, without the clutter of false memories or needless attachments. You can finally exist as your true self." There was silence for a moment, then a question, soft, uncertain. "Will I remember any of this?" "Remember what?" The reply came with the faintest trace of amusement, and something else, something that made the waking Veronica's blood run cold. "These nights," her voice on the recording continued weakly, "this change." A chuckle, almost kind. "Oh, I don't think that's necessary. Memory is such a heavy thing, isn't it? Better to live in the present where everything is simple, peaceful." And then nothing. The recording ended. From that day forward, the woman who lived in apartment 2B looked like Veronica Hartwell, spoke like her, moved through her routines, but she was not the same. She went to work at what she now remembered as the museum. She called her mother every Sunday. She smiled at neighbors in the hallway. She never thought about the recorder again. In fact, she no longer remembered ever owning one. Her sleep was deep now, dreamless, calm. Her days ran together like a seamless film. No strange gaps, no disquieting questions, no flickers of doubt. Her life fit perfectly, every memory matching every moment, every story aligning without fault. But sometimes, just sometimes, she would wake before dawn, her heart racing for no reason she could name. The air would feel different, the silence heavier, and for a fleeting second she would feel like someone else was in the room with her, someone watching quietly, waiting for her to fall back asleep. Then the feeling would fade, and she would smile, brush it off, and return to her peaceful, perfect life. Her life had become almost unnaturally calm, each day unfolding with clockwork precision, each thought perfectly in place. It was a life so balanced, so smooth, that it left no room for doubt, fear, or even curiosity. The small black recorder she once kept beside her bed still rested in the nightstand drawer, buried under a layer of old receipts and forgotten things. Sometimes, late at night, when the world outside was utterly still, its red light would flicker to life, as if answering a call no human ear could hear. By dawn, it would fade again into silence, unnoticed. No more recordings were made after that, or perhaps no one remained to listen. In the hospital basement, the young sleep technician would occasionally mention the case to her coworkers, the woman whose brain had registered perfect, uninterrupted sleep while her recorder captured hours of intricate, impossible conversation. At first, it fascinated them. Then, as weeks passed, the story lost its shine. People stopped asking questions. Machines don't lie, after all, and the machines had said she slept peacefully. When the woman came to collect her files, she looked genuinely confused. "I'm sorry," she said softly, "but there must be some mistake. I've never participated in a sleep study, and I don't own a recorder." Her signature was there, her name on the forms, her readings in the system. Everything checked out. The technician hesitated but finally shrugged it off and handed her the small device. That night, the technician realized she couldn't remember what the woman's face had looked like. Her voice, too, was gone from memory, just a strange emptiness where an image should have been. 6 months later, the apartment changed hands. The new tenant, Patricia, a graduate student working on her thesis about sleep disorders, found the flat cozy but oddly sterile, as if someone had wiped away every trace of the person who'd lived there. In a drawer by the bed, she discovered the old recorder, a forgotten relic. At first, she used it for research, setting it on her nightstand to capture her sleep patterns. For weeks, the recordings were perfectly ordinary. The faint sound of rain against the windows, her slow breathing, the creaks of an aging building settling into the night. Then one morning, something changed. Patricia pressed play and froze. On the tape, her voice spoke clearly, but not alone. "I've been dreaming about places I've never seen," her recorded self said. "People I don't know, but it all feels real, more real than this." A soft, melodic voice replied, "That's fascinating. Tell me more about these dreams. I think they might be important." Patricia listened to the entire exchange with a rising sense of dread. She remembered nothing, no dreams, no midnight conversations. And yet, it was undeniably her own voice, responding naturally to someone who shouldn't exist. That night, she placed the recorder beside her bed again. This time, she felt something different, a strange pull, a quiet eagerness. She lay there in the dark, waiting. The air felt charged, almost expectant. As she drifted toward sleep, she thought she heard someone whispering in the distance, soft, patient, familiar. Her name echoed gently through her mind, and a wave of calm washed over her. By morning, she remembered nothing, only a lingering sense that something wonderful and perhaps irreversible had begun. And beneath the stillness of dawn, in the quiet corner of her nightstand, the red light glowed steadily on, recording everything.